Who am I? I am Brick City Brown Chick. Brick City, Newark, New Jersey, where I was born and raised. Brown Chick, because, well, obviously. I am a proud Black Gen X woman. I am smart, sarcastic, and honest. Sometimes too honest for my own good. I have been happy, grateful, and joyful. But I have also been sad, resentful, and depressed. I have cursed people out, with cause, mind you, and I have walked away from friendships that no longer served me, also with cause. I have been the good girl, the good friend, the good daughter, and the good wife. But I have also been the angry ex, the resentful friend, the withdrawn child, and the frustrated wife. I have a bachelor's and a master's degree, both of which I worked really hard for. I have numerous continuing education certifications. I have a job which provides me a good living, but minimal satisfaction. I have a home that I love, but sometimes wish I was wealthy enough to gut, enlarge, and just redo. I have a husband who deals with a lot, as do I, as all married people do. I have a dog and a cat who I wish would just stop being temperamental animals and get along already. It's only been 4 years. I have plans, dreams, and goals that have nothing to do with my current life. Because at the end of the day, I know the reality is that the only person who can make any changes to any and all of the above is me. Welcome to What I Know Now, a life lessons podcast for anyone going through it and still trying to figure it out. Oh, now attitude. Why even bother? I can't change your mind. You can't change my color. Welcome back, everyone, to What I Know Now. I am your host, Brick City Brown Chick, and this is episode 27, A Day in the Life. This episode is very closely tied to last week's episode, episode 26, which is, as a matter of fact, I'm not racist. So I advise you to listen to that episode first before jumping into this one. The lyrics I quoted at the beginning of this episode are from En Vogue, from a song called Free Your Mind, which is a song about prejudice and people's prejudices. Last week, we talked about the difference between prejudice and racism and why people use them interchangeably and why that's completely incorrect. This week, I'm going to talk about something that happened to me just a few days ago. And as I go through the events, I'm going to tie this back to discussions about prejudice. This past Friday, my friend Dee and I went out to Virginia to see, appropriately, En Vogue, along with Jody Watley and TLC. Jody Watley has been on my bucket list of people to see for probably close to 30 years. She's an amazing artist, one who I don't think gets as much credit as she deserves. Jody Watley and Madonna are contemporaries. They were born within a year of each other. And as I look back on Madonna's early days with the bows and the tulle skirts and all that sort of look, I look back on Jody Watley and I'm like, yeah, Jody Watley did it first. And Jody Watley just has this star attitude and magnetism. The best way I can describe Jody Watley, if you've never seen her or aren't familiar with her music, is take the model Iman. Now, I know today there are like 3 or 4 models named Iman, but I'm talking about the original, the woman who was married to David Bowie. Take her walk and her attitude and add the ability to sing and the ability to dance. And that is Jody Watley. She is a phenomenal performer. En Vogue, I've seen before, and they are really, really good. Back in their heyday, they were a 4-piece ensemble. But today they are 3 pieces, 3 women. And it's super interesting watching how they have changed their 4-part harmony over the years to 3-part harmony, which sounds easy to do, but it's really not. So they were really great. And TLC, who I have also wanted to see for a long time and finally got the chance to see them. So my friend and I went out to Virginia, where this venue is. I won't name the venue. I'm just going to say it's kind of out in the sticks. And a lot of people from the Maryland, Washington, Virginia area will know where I'm talking about. And so we went to eat first, and then we went out to the venue. One of the things that has always been disconcerting to me is, as much as I love music, and if you've been with this podcast for more than a minute, you know that I really do love music. I've always felt like music should be the thing in the world that brings people together. And sometimes that's true, but more often than not, it's not. It's, you've got white music and you've got black music. And a lot of times they don't mix, either in shows or in audiences or in perception. And the best example I can give of that in American music is country music. There has long been this, well, I'll call it what it is. There's long been this hatred of Black artists in country music. People who feel like Black people have no business in country music because, as I've heard more than white person say, this is our music. You people have your music. And that's all nonsense, of course, because there have been Black artists in country since there was country music. So it's not only offensive, it's just flat out wrong. But that's the way some people feel. This is also something that becomes really clear every year when the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame nominations come out and then when the inductees are announced. Every year, there is a plethora of people, in this case, a lot of metalheads, who feel like the people who are inducted do not belong because they don't represent rock and roll. It's an argument that is old and tired and makes me shake my head every single year. One of the things I always point out to these people when I get into these heated discussions is the first woman who was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the inaugural class, is Aretha Franklin. And you cannot tell me that with all Aretha Franklin did over her 60 odd year career, that she doesn't belong in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, regardless of how you feel about her. No intelligent person can make that argument. So, for example, this year, Mary J. Blige is going in, which is sobering for me only because Mary J. Blige and I are the same age. So it's just kind of like, oh boy, we're at people my age now. But a lot of people had strong opinions that she does not belong there because she doesn't represent rock and roll. Like I said, it's an old, tired, lazy, and in most cases, racist trope. But it's a trope people continue to carry the banner for nonetheless. So when we arrived at the venue, I was expecting the crowd to be, I don't know, 75 to 80% Black because all of the artists were Black. And that's just my experience having spent the last 40 odd years of my life going to concerts and knowing what the makeup was going to be. There are very few artists that I've ever seen in person who have the ability or have the reach to cross that racial line. The two that come to mind immediately are Hall and Oates and Earth, Wind, and Fire. I've seen both of those groups many times, and those audiences are pretty much 50-50. But all the other artists I've seen, that's just not true. My husband and I are going to see Janet Jackson this weekend. I guarantee you 75% of that audience will be Black. It's just one of those things. So when we arrived and I came to the realization that the number was flipped, that probably 80% of the crowd was white, I frankly was confused. I just didn't understand how that was a thing. Now, most of the people at the show were people my age, some people a little older. So it wasn't an age thing. It was just surprising to me that so many white people came out to see Jody Watley and Vogue and TLC. And I just sort of looked around the venue and looked at my friends and said, yeah, this isn't the crowd makeup I was expecting. And what she pointed out was this particular area of Northern Virginia, when this venue was built, and we're not talking about 40 years ago, we're not talking about the 1980s, we're talking about 20 years ago in the early 2000s when it opened. That area of Virginia was not, we'll say, very friendly to Black people. And for a long time, and obviously it continues, Black people did not feel comfortable going to that venue because they knew they were not welcomed there. And she said a lot of Black people in this area still feel like that. Even though it was 20 years ago, people still have really strong feelings about seeing shows there because they went sometime before and didn't feel welcome and still don't feel like they'd be welcomed now. I do have a personal experience of going to that venue almost 20 years ago now in 2005. My husband and I had these back to back shows. So one Friday, we went to see Hall and Oates, and a couple of Fridays later, we went to see Meatloaf. Meatloaf was a gift to him for his birthday. Meatloaf is not my cup of tea, but he's always liked him, so we went to the Meatloaf show. Okay, first, the Hall and Oates show. People who go to this venue, or at least people who went to this venue back then, did not party, I guess is a good word. They weren't jumping up and dancing and clapping along and shaking their fists and things people do at concerts. Me, for example, I am up at a concert the whole hour and a half or 2 hours or whoever it is I came to see perform. I'm up and I'm dancing and I'm having a good time. And I honestly don't care what the people around me are doing. I get looks from people sometimes. I don't care. I spent my money just like you spent your money. And if you want to sit there like a bump on a log, that's you. But that's not how I go to shows. And so it was just weird to me looking around of everybody just sitting in their seats. And then after songs were over, politely clapping. It was just weird and cultish and disturbing. And what I figured out was this venue that I'm talking about is more known for doing plays and symphonies and operas. They do a lot of international operas that they satellite in from overseas. So you can go see Dolce Vita in its original language and all that sort of thing. So I just figured that the crowd was not used to concerts, I guess. But the other side of that is, I don't know why you'd buy a ticket to a concert if you're not going to have a good time. It's just weird to me. So I sort of put that to the side. And then we went back a couple of weeks later to see Meatloaf. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with Meatloaf or not. The song everybody knows is 2 out of 3 Ain't Bad, and the other one is Love by the Dashboard Light. If you're familiar with the way Meatloaf performed when he was live, he didn't sing so much as screeched and yelled. It was sort of an Ozzy Osbourne kind of thing. That was just his style. Okay. We had like 12th row center tickets, and it was loud, it was a lot. But again, the crowd was just sort of sitting there on their hands, to the point where Meatloaf got super irritated in the middle of the show and had the band stop and just stopped and started screaming, "Are you people there? Are you awake?" Like, it was just weird. So my husband and I were like talking to each other, like, this sort of talking about, what was going on and what was up with these people. And a man in front of me turned around, looked at me, and said, "Do you mind? We are trying to enjoy the show." And I looked back at him and said, "You can't hear the guy screeching on the stage with the speaker 10 feet from you?" And he just turned around again. But it was just like, after that, we both said, okay, we're not going back to this venue. These people don't know how to have a good time. Maybe it's just a Northern Virginia thing, and we just need to stick to going to shows in Maryland and DC. So that was my personal experience with the venue. So after seeing the crowd makeup, I was kind of like, okay, am I even going to enjoy this show? Because if these people are just going to sit on their hands for the next 3 hours, it's going to be a really long night. Now, obviously, some things have changed in the last 20 years. There were some people who were up dancing and everybody was singing along. And so it's a little less uptight than it used to be. But as a Black person, when you're in a crowd of people where you're greatly outnumbered, it puts you on guard. It makes you look around and really look at people and think, okay, if something goes down here, where's my exit? How do I get out? How do I not be in the fray? And that's something as a Black person that you really do have to think about every single day when you walk out of your house. And that is one of the reasons whenever people ask me, do I think America will ever be, colorblind is the word people like to use. And I say absolutely not. And people just stare at me and I'm like, because white people will never understand what that feeling is like. The feeling that you have to always be on guard and be aware of your circumstances and be aware if somebody's following you, just following you, or be aware if somebody's following you in a store, a grocery store, in a clothing store, whatever. You know why you're being followed, but everybody likes to pretend like that's not a thing. And so it's super frustrating. So we got to our seats and I was like, I hope this isn't going to be a horrendous long night after as long as I've waited to see Jody Watley and TLC. Jody Watley had a cold. She didn't let that hold her back. She came out, she performed. Like I said, there were some people who were up and dancing and singing along. I'd say the first like 3 or 4 rows of people were just like up and partying and having a good time. Same thing when In Vogue came out, and they were fabulous, and people had a great time listening to them. And then TLC hit the stage. Now, if you don't know the long story about TLC and their background, I'll give you the short version. TLC were 3 girls from Atlanta. Their stage names are T-Boz, Left Eye, and Chili, hence TLC. TLC was a group that sold millions and millions of records. They were the best selling girl group since the Supremes in the 1960s. Famously, they went bankrupt because the contract they signed with their music company was crazy ridiculous in favor of the music company. And Left Eye famously said at the Grammys one year, let me tell you the story of how you can sell 5 million albums and still go broke. So that's one of the things people remember about them. In their heyday, probably at the height of their popularity, their center member, Left Eye, was killed in a car crash in Honduras. And there was a long discussion with the other 2 members and with their management of if they were going to continue, and if they were going to continue, how they were going to do that. The way TLC is set up structurally is the T-Boz is the alto voice. She's the lower register voice. Chili is the soprano. She is the higher level voice. And Left Eye was the rapper. She was the bridge that brought T-Boz and Chili's voices together. So she was the middle ground and did all the rapping. There's a lot of rap in TLC songs. And so T-Boz and Chili went through a phase where they thought they weren't going to perform, and then they started performing again, and then people asked the inevitable question of whether they were going to replace Left Eye. And what they've always said was Left Eye is irreplaceable, not just because she was our band member, but she was our friend. There is no replacing our friend. And so I've heard over the years of different things they do when they perform. And at this point in their careers, what they're doing is they always include Left Eye in their shows, even though she's been gone for more than 20 years now. So, whatever part of the song Left Eye rapped over, they have her voice recorded so that they always, I guess you'd say, let Left Eye do her part, even though she's not there. So seeing them was sort of a bittersweet, melancholy kind of feeling because if you were into TLC back in the day, you can't see T-Boz and Chili and not wonder what might have been. If Left Eye were still here, how different they would be and how great they would still be. So it was just sort of a weird feeling that I wasn't quite expecting. But we got probably halfway, maybe a little more than that, through the TLC show. And my friend and I looked at each other and were like, we probably better get out of here because this is going to be a stampede. Like, it is going to be insanity trying to get out of here. And we knew we had over an hour drive to get back to Maryland. So we're leaving the venue, and I'm looking around and I'm looking at the lawn and like seas of people. And again, it was just an interesting thing to see so many white people turn out for these Black artists. And it was great to see that they were people my age, in my age group, people who are Gen X or people who are late millennial. And that, in a small way, gives me some hope for people being able to open their minds to different things. But we got to her car and we got in the car and we got the driving directions to get back home, and we were both just really tired and really drained, not just because it had been an incredibly long day, not just because we were partying during the show, and not just because it was hot as Hades. I think it was like 97 degrees at 6 or 7 o'clock, and it was so hot, so uncomfortable. Literally, my makeup melted off my face. It was just ridiculously hot. But we were both also tired because it's only when we're alone or sort of with other Black people who get it that we can sort of, exhale and decompress and not have to be on guard, not have to be so like you have to be prepared for anything at any time. And that's really the part of this that I want white people to try to understand, because again, it's not something I think white people will ever fully understand, because it is not something that's ever happened to them or ever will happen to them. Many, many years ago, and I mean like the 1960s, there was a book written called Black Like Me. And you can find it in the library, you can find it online. It's been printed and reprinted several times. I think the last reprinting was 2011 or 2012. And the book is the story of a white man in the 1960s who took some combination of drugs that temporarily darkened his skin. And this was a social experiment for him. And he went through the, Jim Crow and immediate aftermath of the South living as a Black man. And I think the experiment was originally designed to last for 90 days, and he didn't make it a month. And that is what he tells the story of how badly he was treated and chased and spit on, not for doing anything, not for doing anything right or wrong, just for walking down the street, just for existing. And so what I want people to understand is, for Black people, existing is difficult, is stressful, is a lot of the reason that whenever people say, oh, Black people have a higher rate of diabetes and hypertension and cancer and all sorts of other diseases. And people always say, well, it's because of how you people live, it's because of how you eat, it's because of you don't take care of yourselves. And that's always frustrated the hell out of me because, again, if you've never lived a life where your existence is threatened on a daily basis and you never know from who or from where the threat is coming from, don't lecture people about their lifestyle and how they live and how they survive and what they have to do. Because it's not a world you come from and it's not a world you understand, and you never will. What Black people want white people to do, well, most Black people want white people to do, is empathize, is try to put yourself in our shoes and understand that our lives are a constant struggle. And that has nothing to do with whether we're rich or middle class or poor. When you hear stories from rich Black people about being pulled over by the cops and frisked or questioned or whatever, and then all of a sudden the cops realize that they're famous and, leave them alone or let them go, it's quite the awakening. People have, and I know this because just a few days ago, a boxer got himself into huge trouble and suspended from his boxing league for using the death of George Floyd as the punchline to a joke. And so, in just 4 years, we've gone from people being shocked and horrified and terrified of seeing a policeman lay on a Black man's neck and kill him, to now using that as the butt of a joke. And how quickly that has changed has been disheartening and infuriating. And the fact that we are now in a state in our politics in America where people are saying the quiet part out loud. They're saying, can we take all these illegal immigrants and throw them out of the country? We don't want to teach our children about slavery because they'll feel bad. Black people shouldn't get reparations because these Black people were never slaves, and people overplay slavery anyway, and slavery wasn't really that bad, and all the other nonsense that people say. America seems bound and determined to try to dial back the clock. People want to go back to the good old days of, the 1950s and 60s. And the truth is, the good old days weren't good for a lot of us, for our ancestors, our parents, our grandparents, our great grandparents. So America is clearly choosing to be in favor of white is right and Black get back. Now, there are people who will tell me that I'm exaggerating or that I'm sounding the alarm for something that doesn't need to be sounded. And again, what I say to those people is, live a minute in my shoes, or live 10 minutes in my shoes, or the shoes of any other Black person in America. Live for 10 minutes and you will gain a completely different perspective of what this country is and how it treats its citizens differently. Whenever I hear one of the current presidential candidates yell and scream about a two-tier justice system, for once he's right. He is absolutely right, but not for the reason he thinks. There is a justice system for the rich and the white, and there's a system for the poor and the brown. And that's just who America is. Whether that's something we continue to be and continue to bask in is our choice. And what I know now is America has proven that sometimes it will take its own white America. Let me clarify. White America will put its needs above everyone else's and take the tenor and tone that as long as things are good for them, they don't care what things are like for everyone else. And that's a really terrible, terrible place for our country to be. I want to thank everyone for joining me for this episode this week. You can catch this podcast every week on YouTube. There are new episodes out at 5 a.m. every Thursday morning. You go to YouTube/Brick City Brown Chick. You will pick up all the 26 now episodes of this podcast. I want to thank everybody for joining me this week, and I look forward to seeing you again. Bye-bye.